From Studio 19, I'm Jeff Allen Wolf, and this is definitely a world gone mad. Here we go. Okay, so Donald Trump has managed to pick a trade war with Canada. Canada, the country next door, one of our biggest trading partners. You know, the people we spent decades building an economy with, where products, parts, and raw materials cross that border every single day. And now Trump's answer is 50% tariffs on about $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. Canada's response? Fine. You hit us, we'll hit you. They're retaliating dollar for dollar beginning September 8th. So I'm not going to spend the next several minutes explaining international trade theory to you. I don't give a damn about making you, the listener, an economist. I want to tell you what I'd be doing right now. Because when politicians start throwing 50% tariffs at each other, eventually somebody gets the bill. And congratulations, America, we're that somebody. If you regularly buy toilet paper, paper towels, tissues, buy a little extra now. Not a garage full. We're not reenacting the great toilet paper shortage, the hostage crisis of 2020. But Canada is enormously important to the paper products we use in this country. And paper is right in the middle of this fight. If there's a brand you normally use and it's on sale, buy two instead of one. You're going to use it anyway. Same thing with household necessities that don't spoil, cleaning products, toiletries, things you know you're going to need over the next several months. This isn't panic buying. It's buying Tuesday's groceries before somebody in Washington decides they should cost Friday's prices. And if you've been putting off replacing the appliance that's already wheezing like it's asking for last rites, I'd start shopping. Washer, dryer, dishwasher, refrigerator. I'm not saying throw out a perfectly good refrigerator because Donald Trump woke up pissed off at Canada. I'm saying if you already know you're going to need one, you've got a decision to make. Appliances are caught in this mess also. And then there's the big one coming down the road, cars. Trump is now threatening 50% tariffs on Canadian cars, trucks, and auto parts beginning January 1st. Do you understand how insane 50% is? If you're planning to replace a car sometime soon, I'm not telling you to run into a dealership this afternoon, waving your credit card over your head. I'm telling you, pay attention now. And if your car needs a repair you've been postponing, particularly something involving expensive parts, I'd at least find out now what it's going to cost. Because here's what drives me absolutely crazy. Trump talks about tariffs as though Canada is going to receive an invoice from the United States Treasury. They're not. American companies importing tariffed Canadian products pay the tariff. And businesses don't generally say, gee, I guess we'll just eat that extra cost because we love our customers. They pass along what they can to us. So here's my advice. And it's not complicated, Wolfpack. Don't panic. Prepare. Walk around your house. What are you already running low on? What expensive purchase have you already been planning? If the answer is, I'm going to need this anyway, and you could comfortably afford it now, buying ahead may make sense. But please don't put $2,000 worth of shit you don't need on a credit card charging 25% interest because you're trying to beat a tariff. Then you've managed to out-Trump Trump economically, and that's an achievement. Then understand why we're having this conversation in the first place. This isn't a hurricane. This isn't a pandemic. This isn't some unavoidable, global catastrophe that suddenly disrupted commerce between the United States and Canada. This is a choice. Our government chose to slap massive tariffs on products coming from one of our closest allies. Canada chose to hit back. And now ordinary people on both sides of the border get to stand in the checkout line and discover what international diplomacy looks like when it's printed on a receipt. So don't lose your mind. Don't empty Costco. And don't ignore this either. Because when politicians decide to have a trade war, they're not the ones standing at Walmart wondering why the same package they bought 3 months ago suddenly costs $5 more. You are. And while Donald Trump is busy having a trade war with Canada, Pete Hegseth has apparently decided the United States Army could use a little chaos of its own. The New York Times has taken a look at what happened to the Army under Hegseth, and the numbers are staggering. When Hegseth took over the Pentagon, the Army had 10 active duty 4-star generals. Today it has 5. 5. The fewest in decades. And the Army hasn't had a permanent chief of staff since April, when Hegseth fired General Randy George without publicly explaining why. You would think replacing the top officer of the United States Army might move fairly high on the Secretary of Defense's to-do list. You know, somewhere between preventing World War III, making sure the Pentagon has enough coffee. Apparently not, because Hegseth has also forced out at least 3 senior officers who are considered possible replacements for George. This is the interesting way to fill a vacancy. Fire the guy who has the job, get rid of people who might replace him, and then stand around wondering why that chair is empty. And this isn't happening while the Army has nothing particularly important to do. We're dealing with a completely different kind of warfare now. Cheap drones, ballistic missiles, new technology changing battlefields almost, by the month. American bases in the Middle East have been attacked, and the Army is burning through Patriot missile interceptors, defending them. That would seem like a particularly good moment to have experienced people running the fucking Army. Instead, Hegseth is cleaning house. And here's where this goes from disturbing to almost impossible to parody. We learned this morning that just days before General Randy George was fired in April, George had been advised to stop an Army investigation into an unauthorized Apache helicopter flyby near Kid Rock's house. Yes, Kid Rock. Apparently, the United States Army has finally encountered an adversary more dangerous than Iran, Russia, and China combined. Kid Rock's backyard. George reportedly believed that the Army should follow normal procedure and determine whether safety rules had been violated. Days later, Hegseth fired him. The Pentagon has never publicly explained why George was removed, so I'm not going to tell you the Kid Rock investigation caused his firing because we don't know that. But seriously, look at what we're even discussing. This is the United States military. It cannot operate like somebody's personal loyalty club where experienced commanders disappear because somebody at the top doesn't like the answer they gave. And the consequences aren't theoretical. The Army command responsible for training and equipping ground forces, including Patriot missiles and crews, has also gone without permanent leadership. Hegseth selected General David Hodney to run it, and then fired him 8 months later without publicly explaining that one either. At some point, lethality stops being a slogan you print on a coffee mug and starts requiring experienced people who actually know how to run a military. You could change leadership. Presidents and defense secretaries have every right to do that. You could reorganize commands. You could decide the Pentagon has too many generals. But when you keep firing people, leave critical positions empty, push other experienced commanders toward retirement, and replace professional stability with uncertainty, eventually you're not draining bureaucracy. You're draining experience. And if Pete Hegseth wants to keep treating the Pentagon like his own personal episode of The Apprentice, somebody may want to remind him what happens when you screw this one up. There's no boardroom at the end. There are American soldiers. And finally, we need to talk about the midterms, because they're about 70 days away, Wolfpack, and apparently that's the perfect time to start screwing around with how Americans vote. The Supreme Court, in another 6-3 decision, has cleared the way for the Trump administration to begin implementing key parts of his executive order restricting mail-in voting. And before anybody thinks the Supreme Court ruled Trump's plan constitutional, no, they didn't. They basically said the states challenging it got to the courthouse too early, whatever that means. The court itself acknowledged that what the administration ultimately does may not be legal. In other words, go ahead, start rearranging the furniture. We'll decide later whether you were allowed inside the house. And what does Trump want? Among other things, a federal citizenship list that states would have to work with. New requirements involving mail ballot envelopes, and a system in which the Postal Service could refuse to transmit a mail-in ballot if the voter isn't properly enrolled on the required list. With 70 days until an election that could determine control of Congress, what could possibly go wrong? Election officials are already designing ballots. Military and overseas ballots have to start going out in September. States have procedures in place. Voters have spent years learning these procedures. And now, right before one of the most consequential midterm elections we've had, Donald Trump wants to reach into the machinery and start changing the fucking parts. This isn't about whether you personally like mail-in voting. Maybe you vote in person. Fine. I usually do too. That's not the point. Nearly 1/3 of eligible voters cast their ballots by mail in 2024. That's not some fringe voting experience being conducted by 6 Democrats in a basement in Portland. That's millions and millions of Americans. And if you genuinely believe a voting system needs reform, then reform it. Pass legislation, hold hearings, establish rules. Give states time to implement them. Give election workers time to understand them. Give voters time to understand them. That's how functioning democracies change election procedures. What you don't do is walk into the operating room while the patient is already on the table and announce that you've brought a new set of instructions. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said this ruling needlessly injects chaos and uncertainty into the midterm elections. Exactly. Because even if some of the Trump's restrictions eventually get blocked again, the confusion itself becomes part of the story. Is my ballot coming? Can I still vote by mail? Has my state changed the rules? Am I on the right list? Will my ballot be accepted? And I'm going to tell you what I think Democrats should be saying right now. Don't wait until November to figure this shit out. Check your registration, check your state's rules. If you vote by mail, know when your ballot is supposed to arrive and what the deadlines are. If something changes, know where you can vote in person. Don't assume the rules you remember from the last election are automatically going to be the rules you encounter this time, because elections aren't stolen only by somebody stuffing a ballot box. Democracy can also be damaged when enough legitimate voters become confused, discouraged, or exhausted and simply give up trying. And with control of Congress sitting on the other side of this election, giving up is exactly what none of us can afford to do. That's my opinion on this episode of A World Gone Mad. I said my thoughts. Now, where are you? wolfpacktalks@gmail.com. If you care to give it a try, it's very easy. It only takes a minute. Please send me your thoughts and comments. I would appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe to my podcast if you haven't. It makes things a lot easier letting you know when a new episode is out. Remember, the podcast is free. And check out my Substack once a week. It's different from the podcast. Some people like to read instead of listening. Some people like to do both. If you don't have the Substack app downloaded, search for me, The Wolf's Den. There are other dens, but look for my name, Jeff Allen Wolf, The Wolf's Den. And the Substack is also free. You don't need to download your contacts. You don't need to pay anything. Just hit subscribe, and you'll be notified on new future articles. You also don't need to be subscribed to the Substack to read my articles. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is definitely a world gone mad. I'll be back Friday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolfpack, remain skeptical. Question everything. Please, don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.